So with our seasonal adjustments made to our bike, it's about starting to look at and think about how the trails will change and how our technique needs to change to stay on top of our game when the terrain starts to give us a little bit more to think about. First off, in terms of vision, now we always talk a lot about vision because it's a massively important part of riding at any speed or successfully mastering a trail, is to not get sucked in by what we call visual performance cues. But as we can see here, the summer growth of the bracken and the ferns is still pretty high. Now over the course of the winter, obviously that's going to die back down. But on the flip side, there's going to be a lot more leaf debris and mulch on the trails themselves. So the actual trail surface might well become disguised as we progress through autumn and winter. The fact that the bracken and fern is dying down is a massive advantage to us. All of a sudden my lines of sight open up. The trails are less framed and less drawing me into looking straight down them rather than up and through. So through this corner here, as this bracken on the right dies down, I'll get a much better line of sight. But it's remembering to use that and not become all absorbed in terms of not being able to see down onto the trail surface where leaf mulch is built up. I don't need to see every little last detail of the trail as I ride through it. It's useful to see it, but I've got to work a little bit more on feeling. And it's all about how I set myself up. So with my heel and wrist dropped and head up, pushing into the bike all the time, any time that I do hit something unexpected below the wheels where it might be masked by leaf coverage, I'm already in a position where rather than me being pushed onto that front wheel, I'm doing the pushing. So remember, be the pusher, drop your heels, drop your wrists and set up for success. You shouldn't change your position to get into that position, you should ride in that position and be ready. Always read a lot about attack and ready position. Both of them don't seem to be ready for much. If you've got to move out of a ready position to do anything, then you're not really ready. When we're sat in the pocket, nicely stuck into the bike, sat into the bike with heel and wrist, we're ready for those unexpected inputs that might come our way. Big part of that is upper body form. If I get lurched forward onto the front wheel, it's not going to rise and fall so smoothly over things. And if it becomes easier to move sideways than forwards, that's exactly what it's going to do. But if I keep upper body nice and in check, keep my upper body form good, my hips, chest and head all pointing where I want to go, those heels and wrists dropped, I'm going to be creating a lot of force in a straight forward or the direction I'm pointing, and that's going to push the front wheel up and over things rather than down and in. So as the bracken dies down, excellent news for us is in terms of lines of sight, and don't worry too much about the trail itself being masked by leaf and foliage, which is going to happen at some point. You may have a good set of trail pixies around that blow down your trails every now and again and keep things running sweet and give you both the advantage of better sight lines and a clear vision of the trail surface. But in general, keep that head up, look through the sections, not down into the trail, and you should be sweet. Another aspect of looking and vision during riding in the wetter season or even any time of the year after it's rained is the prevalence of new performance cues, new visual performance cues on the trail. Where through a dry period, this section here would be mud-free, puddle-free. Because of the rain that we had in the last few weeks, which has typically gone away just when we needed it to be here, there's still some residue of mud and puddle here. As I come round this corner, it's really easy to start dropping my head into that and look at that. Things might start going through your mind about slipping, about sliding, about stalling. We've just got to be a bit more positive about things. And what we can see here is very clearly how a puddle here that doesn't drain very well has led to quite a lot of trail creep. Now you times this by tenfold all over the hills and you'll start to see how the trails start to degenerate and how it starts to spread out and go from single track to great big tracks of sort of beaten up, broken up trail and landscape which is being kind of broken down by riders. Instead of negatively responding to that performance cue is to look up and through and not have this dilemma of through it or round it, but just take a more positive approach, get ourselves through the section, look up and through, and we're going to look at some physical attributes which we can apply to make sure that that softer patch doesn't stall the bike too much or cause us to slide out. But just from a visual perspective, changing colour, mud, roots that look a bit greasier and slimier are all going to start to can easily start to kick off a downward spiral in terms of our commitment and our confidence. That will lead to some physical manifestations we looked at last issue in terms of holding breath, tightening up, death grip in the bars, none of which are going to contribute to smooth riding or to maintaining or finding grip. So when it comes to those visuals, look up and through, we're going to have to address them. We might make some changes to how we ride them, but the first point is not to be making this mental decision process as I come around the corner and stalling my thought process. Look up and through, take a confident line and work on applying a couple of little extra bits in terms of technique to make sure that we find the grip that is there, but it's just a little bit harder to get to. So on that earlier section we saw how the presence of a puddle was pushing people off the trail and contributing towards what we call trail creep. Here we've got the other flip side really. The puddle itself is off the trail, but as riders come around this corner and spot it, they kind of get locked onto the puddle rather than looking up and around on the tighter line around the corner. What you'll find then is that there's a moment of indecision as they come around the corner, and inevitably when that happens the path of less resistance is the one we follow, which is a wider line down through this puddle, which I think has been here since about 1952, is full of green stinking stuff that I really don't want to put my tyres through, and as much as being trail creep, it also stinks. So if we can commit as we come through this corner to pick our eyes up and look up and through to a further point down the trail, a high point further on, in this case one of the telegraph poles nicely placed 100 yards ahead of me, then that will give me a point to look to, a positive reference to look to, rather than down into a performance cue, something much more positive. My body will twist and I'll take this inside line far easier than getting through all that horrible stuff down there, and far less bike cleaning to do at the end of the season. Added to that, there's a few little routes on the inside line which again will bully people across, and the final thing is what we refer to as tyranny of the tyre mark, and this will become more and more prevalent as the winter goes on. Tyre marks become more pronounced in softer ground, obvious. When they do become more pronounced, we tend to look down and follow them. So it might not have been Steve Peat that's made those tyre marks, it might have been a first timer who's not riding a very good line, but even so, we kind of lock onto them and follow them. So don't be bullied by other people's tyre marks, don't follow the crowd, pick your own line, and in this case we want to get on the high side, is the dry side, avoid this stinking bog and get home slightly cleaner than perhaps if we go through that puddle.